your seats.
All right, we'll call the CIP meeting to order. I guess roll call.
Councilmember Bogas. Here. Deputy Mayor Purden.
Here.
Mayor Gibson.
Here.
Councilmember Corey.
Here.
Councilmember Fullick. Councilmember Fitzpatrick. Here. Councilmember Carr.
I think she'll be right back. I think she had to let her dog out or something. Okay.
Who let the dog?
Is there an order on which?
I had time to go.
Yes.
Those an option. Go steal your dog.
It says stormwater and transportation. So let's start with stormwater.
Water and transportation.
Your phone and all your shit, right?
No, I don't know what I'm doing.
Love one, but
You're all started. Thank you, Mayor and Council. This will be the first of a series of workshops where we'll take each of the strategic priorities and go through the CIPs that specifically relate to them. We'll go into further detail on the strategic planning session, which is March 5th at 12 p.m. And then we'll continue to break out each of these individual CIPs so that we continue to review them in our budget preparations for the 25-26 fiscal year.
Thank you. Matt?
Good morning, City Council and Mr. Mayor. I was going to speak to you on first on our stormwater projects, highlight some of the active projects that we have going on, where those projects are, get into some of the components of what they are going to do, and then maybe suggest some areas where City Council may want to consider in future CIPs for next steps. So we have a aerial map here of our major stormwater projects, most notably the one that is under construction and honestly from a city perspective is getting close to wrapping up is the Bonita Springs Golf Course project up here in the blue. Golf course is kind of a misnomer now that it's the Lake District of Bonita. We have another one here along East Terry Street that I'll get further into detail with that is a stormwater transportation project. The money came from stormwater, and we have a future one that's going to be very similar along Pennsylvania corridor. So these are kind of the locations of our primary projects that are going on currently. So I'm going to start with what I started with. The Bonita Springs Golf Course Restoration Project really came out of flooding that was observed during the summer of 2017 and then culminating with Hurricane Irma. If you recall, Invest 92L or Hurricane Harvey, it was a tropical storm, not quite a tropical storm, that Hurricane Harvey in Texas held on our coast, dumped a lot of rain in Bonita Springs, and then it was followed up 2 weeks later by Hurricane Irma. I think it's 2 weeks. So we had flooding, and honestly, we had neighbors that flooded and really didn't, to Councilman Fullick's point, really didn't come to the City Council at first and demand solutions. And one of those neighborhoods is here at Divot and Wood Ibis. It's at the intersection. It's kind of where city ownership and private ownership ended. And unfortunately, this neighborhood, sorry, I can't see very well. This neighborhood is right here in the map. And what happened in 2017 is that they held on to a foot to 18 inches of water for 3 weeks in their neighborhood, three plus weeks. It was lapping at people's garages, and that frequency and return volume of rain, although folks would like to say it was a 1,000-year storm event, it was not. It was actually a 25-year storm event. That was kind of vetted out as we hired a consultant to deal with this. And so the reason I bring that up is it means it could have been worse. So with the golf course project, we pursued dollars from FEMA through a storm-specific grant. We ultimately were able to pay for the design with that. And the design encompassed a 100-year flood event. So we provided as much protection as we could from a 100-year flood. We then partnered with the developer who owned the land, and we are poised to become proud owners of 56 acres of lakes to be able to provide that level of flood protection and the associated piping that interconnects the lakes and gets the water off of the streets. As I mentioned, the project is started construction back in 2023. The city's portion of it, which is primarily these blue lakes that you see and the red piping that interconnects, is pretty much in. They're wrapping up. They haven't turned it over to us yet. Derek and I had a meeting about it yesterday, but the system is functioning. At the start of the summer, they were actually having to do a lot of pumping to ensure that the rainfall that we did receive this year, which was a significant amount, was able to get off the landscape because the system wasn't able to function as it was designed. It was under construction. But at this point, it pretty well is operational. This is where all the water leaves the site. It is located down here on Cockle Shell, kind of at the intersection of where the old golf course actually discharges water. It's the headwaters of Spring Creek.
Matt, that top right picture showing the pipe, I mean, you can see people down in the hole, so you can see the size of that pipe there. That was replacing, what, like 18-inch pipes or something, if I remember?
Well, in cases, probably in that area, it was 24 and 36-inch pipes. That's the inside diameter.
Yeah.
That pipe that you see, it's hard for me to see the people, but that's a 60-inch pipe, so it's 5 foot inside diameter. That 60-inch pipe is connecting this lake, which is called Lake 8, to Lake 1. All the water's moving to this point. And it's also connecting, the pipes gradually increase in size, so it's connecting this drainage area, which is this neighborhood. By the time you get to here, there's 60-inch pipes that are connecting. So it's water coming from the north and northeast that are coming into these large pipes, and then water coming directly from the east. To give you a sense of scale, there's only one other location in the city where we have that size of piping. It's along Shangri-La Road. Shangri-La Road, although I was in Kentucky at the time, experienced flooding during Tropical Storm Faye, and as a result, there was a large drainage project hidden in a roadway project, which was the road connection, but it is a large drainage infrastructure project that helped alleviate the flooding just to the east of this neighborhood. It has some 60-inch pipe. This is probably the most that we have in our inventory at this point. So that's wrapping up and is going to provide a solid level of flood protection higher than was ever seen in these surrounding neighborhoods. The other less exciting part in terms of pipe sizes are there are several interconnections. You can't see them on this map, that connect the east side of the road to the west and send water into that lake. So previously, water was from Woodiva south was having to make a large circuitous path back to this point. That's being cut off and given a much more direct route. So we're not going to experience the same level of water stacking up in those swale systems. And as infill development comes in here, these are private roads, but they have the opportunity to get their water to a conveyance that will get rid of it for them along Paradise Road. The other part about that is that will allow us, with the project you just allowed us to negotiate with the designer on today, that will allow for a much easier creation of a sidewalk along those ditches or enclosed drainage because you already have the connection points. So all you really have to do is close the gaps, which is similar to what we did on West Terry Street years ago. Okay, so the next project I want to talk about is the East Terry Street Stormwater Project. We had a public meeting this summer about this project. This, as you may recall, is primarily funded from a $16.8 million grant that Governor DeSantis brought about 2 years ago down here. It came out of Hurricane Irma, and it is really federal HUD dollars, similar to the dollars that Lee County has currently from Hurricane Ian. It was the same type of funding, except back in 2017, the state of Florida administered the pass-through of those dollars. So this is IRMA money. That's a photo I took during IRMA of a GMC Jimmy stuck in the ditch along East Terry Street. So the impetus for those dollars, and the reason I point that out, is they are there for flooding. We had the meeting, I think some of the council folks were there. There are a lot of opportunities, and I'll talk about it in the next presentation, for transportation improvement, but the primary impetus, the prime mover of this is flooding and flood reduction. So I'm going to go into some of the details. You see here on the top, there's a nice image of what can be laid on top of the flooding infrastructure. The flooding infrastructure here is represented by this pipe. But really all of that is window dressing to the drainage infrastructure. So I'm going to go over some of those points. This project, just to back up a bit, we had a public meeting in the summer. The plans are 90% complete and we're in permitting, and we're under pressure to get this under construction. So as soon as those plans get permits get approved from the Water Management District, we'll publicly advertise it for construction bids, and we'll be under construction as soon as possible. My guess, fall is probably the earliest of this year that you would see that, but we will be pushing an aggressive time frame based on the permitting. So this project addresses a few flooding issues. This is one that folks may not have seen. It actually happened earlier this summer with, I think, the first tropical storm that came through. It's a little bit of bottleneck at the West Terry Street, East Terry Street roundabout, and you will get water that spreads out onto the roadway. And so there's a simple fix with some backflow prevention to the existing stormwater system, and then the construction of a new pipe that will interface with the Goodwin Street project, which is primarily a transportation project, and it'll get that water into Lightner Creek, whereas currently it was kind of bottlenecked and being backed up by the existing infrastructure, and it took a couple of days to draw down. Like I said, it happened during Irma. It also happened, I think it's Tropical Storm Debbie that observed this. It does recede, but that's a heavily traveled thoroughfare. You really don't want standing water on the roadway. It creates a safety hazard. The next area of major drainage improvement is really along East Terry Street. It's a series of pipes, primarily pipes, a little bit of open ditch, that will move water from east to west and then northeast to southwest, and then improve by adding an additional conveyance across Imperial Parkway. This is a little remnant very few people know of called the Orange River. I think it's Orange Creek, sorry, not Orange River. And this will encourage more water to move into it and give it an easier path. Currently, it was kind of stacking up in here along some residents, and then also along the roadway where we saw the GMC Jimmy get trapped in the ditch. Further to the east, there are a couple of major improvements that this project will bring in terms of drainage. One is it will convey just east of Morton Avenue water south and then into the interstate right-of-way. Currently, water has to move along the north side of East Terry Street and then south underneath the I-75 overpass. That is a FDOT maintained system, and from time to time, given the scale of work that they do maintain, it could see better maintenance. And so this increases the size of piping, but it also short circuits that loop and gets us out of having to depend on FDOT's maintenance of some culverts that are underneath the overpass. So it provides you a straighter path that is controlled directly by the city. That is important because this neighborhood here, which is a private neighborhood, has had chronic ponding issues and flooding issues from even just given rainy seasons. And so the faster that we can move water south and into the Imperial River, the interstate drainage system moves directly to the Imperial River at this point. It's just off screen. The faster we can move water out of this area provides relief for this neighborhood's drainage system to be able to dispense its water into the public system. So it gives as much as we can relief to them. There's a second component to this that should also help that neighborhood quite a bit, which is kind of the terminus of this project. So what we've done here is we've traveled further to the east on East Terry Street. So the YMCA is just below me here. The next screen is going to be one iteration to the east to Bonita Grand Drive. And so the biggest idea in this project is the installation of a 3 foot by 6 foot box culvert. What that will do, it's essentially a square pipe or a rectangular pipe. It will allow a large volume of water to move from the northeast to the southwest, which is how sheet flow moves in our area. Currently, if you were to go out there, there's some very undersized piping infrastructure that allows some water to move north and south and some northeast to southwest. But it really doesn't provide enough relief, and so water continues to move westerly. That water ultimately moves westerly to out in front of Morton Grove area and overwhelms the ditch systems here and doesn't allow the developed areas drainage to move into the system. So essentially what we're doing is providing an off-ramp for that water so that it doesn't overwhelm the ditch system to the west. The exciting part, I don't have any slides that really show this is mimicking the pre-development condition. So the Pine Lake Preserve is below here. The city built a water infrastructure project a few years ago with grant dollars. This is a Lee County-owned property, but the city built the water treatment infrastructure and conveyance infrastructure, and it moves water into a severed portion of the Imperial River's tributaries. So in the 60s, when the Kiel Canal was dug, you may hear that term. It's synonymous with the Imperial River. What it did was it picked one of the tributaries of the Imperial, straightened it, and dug it miles to the east as a drainage ditch. And it, by doing so, bypassed the other existing tributaries that were out there. So this is going to reintroduce water into those. It gives it a more circuitous path, which is good for water quality, but it also has a major flood protection component. So that 3 by 6 box culvert is a big deal because it's going to allow a lot more volume of water to move at an earlier point in the rainy season onto a wetland property that normally the water would have moved that way prior to East Terry Street's construction. So the next project is very similar. You're not going to see any slides that go into the level of detail, but the next project is a very similar paradigm. Excuse me, I've got some kind of cold that's nagging at me. We received similar dollars. It's through the Housing and Urban Development Department federally, the Community Block Development Grant, Disaster Recovery. That's the DR here in this acronym. This time, the administrator of it was Lee County. City Council actually got the funding contract, so the agreement between the city and the county, and executed it in your earlier meeting in February. So we're just now getting the funds. The way this will work is we will develop a solicitation for engineering services. We have to have it reviewed by the county and their consultants to make sure that they're comfortable with the federal wickets and requirements being achieved. And then we'll advertise it for responses. It'll come back to City Council, and then the project will start to really get developed as you get an engineer on board. The length of it is from Arroyo Road all the way to the terminus at Matheson of the Pennsylvania Avenue corridor. It's in our capital improvement plan. We identified it as possibly up to $24 million in expense. Currently, we have $21 million in the grant funds. I think there's a lot of opportunity for drainage improvement along pieces of the corridor, maybe not to protect against storm surge, which is what this money is kind of derived from, but for day-to-day drainage operations. Pennsylvania, much like Paradise in the previous project, Pennsylvania is kind of the spine for the drainage in the neighborhoods to the south and north, well, more so the south, of the Pennsylvania Avenue area. And so There's an opportunity there to improve that conveyance and improve the way water moves through that neighborhood and out into the Imperial River to the north, as well as an opportunity for some transportation-related improvements in terms of bike and pedestrian, landscaping, things that, you know, create some traffic calming. That's one of the considerations we've heard out of the neighborhood. So, so that opportunity will exist with this as well. But first and foremost, it's a drainage project, and as we get the engineer on board, we'll work on scaling some of the areas. You know, some areas, particularly east of Old 41 and the roundabout, probably don't lend themselves to too much improvement. It'll just depend on how we tease out the details in this project. But it's coming. It's not a conceptual idea. I think the first time I talked about it, it was an idea we had no funding source for. Now it's a reality. So those are really large projects. You know, they're on the order of 20 million. The golf course is hovering around 18 million. Those are large projects for this city. We also have small issues. This is an issue, Mango Street, back in, oh, I wrote it somewhere, December. You authorized an engineering contract off of one of our continuing services agreements. What happens on Mango Street, this photograph I think is from Hurricane Debbie. It might be Helene, but you'll get an inundation of rainfall west of 41. It can happen in a rainy season, you know, or it can happen with a tropical storm. If it ceases, you'll get ponding, and it will recede within a day into the roadside ditch. If you continue to get rain events that are intense, you'll continue to get the pond, and it won't fully recede. It'll just continue in the roadway, and then the poor FedEx guy delivering in the middle of a tropical storm ends up in a ditch. The problem really is the topography there and the existing drainage infrastructure probably wasn't laid out with a whole lot of forethought many years ago. And then as Bonita Beach Road was widened, it doesn't appear that accommodations were made to connect some of that drainage to the Bonita Beach Road system. So much like what's going on on Paradise Current, well, not anymore, what was going on Paradise Road, where water was having to take a circuitous kind of J-shaped path, the same thing's happening here in Mango. So that slows drainage down, and it's really not the way the natural grade breaks were intended for that water to move. So that makes the problem complicated. That's why we reached out to an engineering firm. There's an extensive amount of survey work in this, but ultimately that contract is to come up with permitted and design plans that will alleviate this situation. All right, another very large drainage project. Well, drainage is a little bit of a strange statement here. So this is the Quinn Street, Dean Quinn Street infrastructure improvements. And this came from the same federal money, HUD, from Hurricane Irma. We are permitted, and we are working through some final right-of-way acquisition with this project. It is a drainage infrastructure project, which is shown here by the red lines. Those are representative of pipes, and the blue are ponds, stormwater ponds. It is a drainage project for the Quinn Street, Lime Street over here, what is this? Lime Street neighborhood to get water off the streets. It will not, I say again, will not stop flooding like you saw with Hurricane Irma, where the riverbanks are overtopped. When the river comes up, it reaches the elevation of the riverbank. It is fed by the swamp to the east. It overtops its banks, and it will come into this neighborhood. This will provide relief from smaller storms and rain events, but when the river exceeds the height of the riverbanks, it will not protect it. We studied this phenomenon in 2019 and presented to council. Some of you may have been on council at the time. And really, to prevent the type of flooding that we saw in Irma or in 1995 or back when I was in Kentucky in 2008 with Tropical Storm Faye. You need a levee system. A levee system or a flood wall system. And that was articulated in a report we did. In the event that City Council pursues a levee or flood wall system, you have to tie into the interstate, which is the high ground. You would need a lot more hydraulic modeling, and you'd need the right-of-way corridor to do so. In the event we do pursue that in the future, or future councils do, this drainage infrastructure would provide some level of protection from a levied system, because once you create a levee, you impound the rainfall that lands behind it. I just want to be clear, the dollars, we got $750,000 from the state legislature for design, we got $11 million from CBDG. We saw the value in pursuing this, knowing that it would not stop this level of flooding in land acquisition. As you may know, we have a lot of homes that are below flood elevation there, and so we were able to site stormwater ponds on existing residential properties and then acquire them. And those acquisitions have been coming through council. You may not know where they were, but you're seeing them now, that they're the blue spots on this map. So we're able to take those folks that were at flood risk out of the equation. That's why I bolded this and drew the 2 arrows, because I want to be exceptionally clear, the level of protection, it will not provide protection from a storm event like Hurricane Irma or anything more significant in terms of rainfall.
So, Ms. Mayor, question?
Yeah.
Can we do any bioreactors in one of these places, or?
That's for the next slide.
I had a question for you. The flood wall, looking at the map, how many homes are actually affected by that if we were to look at a project down the road? I guess I hate to use the word condemnation, but how many homes would need to be removed to make that happen?
You know, I don't know. I can tell you, I know enough to be dangerous. I've been to the 9th Ward of New Orleans after Katrina, and what happened there was flood walls failed. A flood wall requires less of a footprint. Chris can probably speak to this because he's from St. Louis, than a levee. You know, a levee needs, depending on the height, you need 60, 100, 200 feet. A flood wall, is a vertical concrete wall in a panel form that can be built. In the event it fails catastrophically, as we learned during Hurricane Katrina. So that's why you see flood wall called out here, because looking at a levee, to your question, Councilman Fulop, would be even more expensive and more impactful along the neighborhood. What is shown here, I can get you the report, is really a flood wall that would protect against a 25-year level storm. Because to protect against a 100-year level storm, given the existing land elevations, you need to encircle both the north and south side and come back to the interstate overpass, because that's the high ground that you have to tie into. Why that's significant, if you were to construct this, I believe the estimates, which this is several years now, and they were planning level and a little low. We're on the order of $55 to $60 million for this. If you were to pursue this, you're not going to gain any protection from flood insurance payments. So if you build a levee or a flood wall that protects against a 100-year elevation, and there's a buffer on top of that, then it's my understanding, if you get it certified with the federal side of things, the folks that are protected by that levee do not have to pay flood insurance. In this idea here, where you're not encircling, everyone would still have to be paying flood insurance that was behind the protection of those walls.
Unless you went to a 100-year.
Unless you went to a 100-year encirclement of both the north and south side of the river through extensive federal permitting. You would have to hydraulically model, which this came up when we presented this. You'd have to hydraulically model much further to the east, because when you create a constriction like that in the floodway, the water will stack up. It may be not so appreciable because it's a large floodway, but you would have to account for those damages to the upstream landowners.
And what about the aesthetics of such a wall?
They're beautiful.
Are they? Just concrete? Yeah?
Big,
Can we
beautiful wall.
paint murals or something?
Look, all I'm trying to explain to you is the size of and scale of the problem. This infrastructure, when we gave the presentation, it's two years ago or so that we gave the presentation to the residents, we were very careful to create a large framework of historical flooding with images. Congrats to the Historical Society. Ellie, if she's in here, one of the ladies she purchased her home from had old newspaper clippings. And we really tried to drive the point home that we could help you really with land acquisition. That no matter what size pipe, it could be an 84-inch pipe, it is not going to stop water from once it overtops the banks of the river. That's what flood walls and levees do, or home elevation, right? And so at the end of a very long kind of deliberate presentation, we still had homeowners that didn't understand and thought that we were, not explaining physics and science very well. Sorry.
Question for you. This is all predicated upon the work done in 2019. Do we know any incremental effect from the development east of 75 and the water being diverted more towards the river versus south of Bonita Beach Road?
Well, I'm not real aware of where you're talking about because
Specifically,
I don't know that any
going
major
anywhere east of
drainage.
75, so where we got the apartments being built, where Midtown's being built, where all of that down the line, all of that is the retention ponds are built on the backside, bounding Imperial River or Kell Creek.
So I don't want to speak for John, but what I can tell you is we have one of the most stringent water modeling requirements on our development side comparative to our neighbors, where they have to put their future development situation into an interconnected pond and routing model, which is what we use to model these drainage projects. And the standard that they're held to is not to exceed the 100-year flood event on the downstream side. So the simple answer to your question is there should be no impact relational to a 100-year storm. The reality of the flooding that we see in this basin is the basin runs all the way to Corkscrew Road and the crew lands way up to the north. And in a flood situation, it interconnects with the drainage basin further to the east to the Cocohatchee. It moves south. And it also can interconnect with the Lake Trafford drainage system, which is quite surprising. But you get enough water, it's like a freeway in California. You get enough cars on it, they start to spill out into the side streets. So although the developments may have had some measurement, although it wouldn't be in the model that I described, as long as they're doing that correctly. Even if they did, it's such a large volume of water by the time we're flooding, by the time we're experiencing this,
Right.
that it's relatively inconsequential.
Yeah, I just go back to the dialogue in terms of the tropical storm Debbie and so forth, and the back end of Midtown overflowing and so forth, and as it's designed to do, and looking at the kayak landing down in downtown being flooded, and that was not a hurricane.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, when you remove the natural vegetation and put asphalt in, that movement of water.
It's an interesting point you bring up because Debbie is storm surge. So is Milton, and so is Helene. And so everything I'm talking about is rainfall, and it is not designed to stop storm surge. I mean, a levee, I suppose, would, which is kind of what we were talking about earlier. But really the overflow that you speak of is really for riverine water coming from the east, moving northeast, southwest. It is not, and I don't want to speak for their designer, but it's not for storm surge. Storm surge comes in off the coast, runs up the river, is momentary in nature, within a day. And those systems aren't probably designed to address that. Which brings us to home buyout. This is the same neighborhood. We have been successful. You're going to see a pattern here, I think, in landing HUD dollars for disaster recovery. We utilize HUD dollars in many ways for infrastructure. In this case, they offered us $5 million post-Hurricane Irma for home buyout. The city ultimately contributed another $2 million to that. And so with those dollars, we've purchased, and these homes are raised at this point, 14 structures within the flood-prone neighborhood. It was on a voluntary basis, and it took a lot of effort. Ellie McEwen bore a huge brunt in that, but it even included the city council and city staff walking the streets several years ago to drum up interest. It took years to access the money. It was a new program, or on the scale of it was new for the state. But ultimately, as time went on, and you may have noticed it through your council agendas, as we started to deliver on the message that we would tear homes down, we put up signs in each property that said this home was torn down with X amount of dollars, that had a picture of a commercial building flooded to kind of drive that reminder home to folks that you may be in a flood-prone area. Excuse me. Ultimately, we were able to exhaust the funding purchasing 14 homes. Just recently, late in 2024, I don't recall the date exactly, another line that we dropped in the water with COVID money from FEMA came through. And so we had asked a couple of years ago for $4 million for home buyout in the neighborhood. We know that really, absent a levy system, it's relocation. It's either relocation vertically with your home, or it's relocation physically by moving out of the area. So we asked for another $4 million, 4.1. We were awarded it. It took a while, but it did come through out of monies through FEMA through COVID. It does require a $475,000 match. We have some dollars we believe that are already in our CIP that can be used for that. And the catch with this program is it is FEMA money, not HUD. And so you had to have the structures pre-authorized at the time that you asked. So it's 11 structures. The 11 addresses that we have are the only ones that we can utilize these dollars on. There's no supplanting, if someone's no longer interested, it doesn't work that way. And we've run into that before. That's actually where I think the match money is going to come from, is another FEMA program where they need to know those answers up front. The benefit from the HUD piece was we could work with people and we didn't have to have that answer up front. So if those move through, that'll be somewhere around 25 structures that have been removed out of the floodplain. Oh, so Councilwoman Carr asked about bioreactors. I don't really want to touch too much on it. We're still evaluating the bioreactor, but these properties, they have restrictive covenants on them. So we can't do economic development on those properties. But one of the things we can do is limited recreational and stormwater treatment. And I believe with the way we have been fortunate in lining up the properties, now Ellie's worked hard to get some consistency where, neighbor A sells, neighbor B sells, neighbor C sells. There's probably an opportunity for some type of water quality project in the future that the city could do. And that's beneficial. One of the challenges and one of the reasons the city looked at the bioreactor in the first place is we don't have a lot of large tracts of land that you can do a traditional water quality treatment project on. And the traditional thinking generally lends you to larger sites. So you're forced with this kind of sword of Damocles. Like at one point, the dog park was identified for a water quality project. Well, we ended up with a dog park and now some soccer fields, or you could have just had a big dry retention pond that was usable for nothing but stormwater. So looking for technologies that have a smaller footprint that are maybe more effective is one of the strategies, and actually the home buyout may help us, assuming that some of our early results get proven up a little bit more with phase 3 of the bioreactor. Okay, so what we've done with the bioreactor is we built a treatment facility. It happens to have an unlit parking lot over the top of it, but really what's underneath it is a treatment facility. In phase 2 of that, we did some initial testing, and that initial phase was designed to just treat rainfall, not water directly from the river, for nitrogen reduction. We did some early static testing and realized it would make a lot of sense to connect it to the river system. And we pursued an emergent grant and we're successful in making that direct connection. The connection, though, based on permitting, was really dependent on tide and tidal influence. And there is tidal influence where the bioreactor's intake is. And so there are times where it cannot operate. This is a good time of year where that happens. You get the lowest of tides in the wintertime, couple it with a full moon or a new moon, and you don't have enough water moving through to be able to withdraw out of the current intake. So our first thing that we did for relatively, it was not simple, but relatively inexpensively, is we installed a SCADA system, which is just code for the ability to remotely operate it with your iPhone. So we have the ability to monitor, get warnings, turn it on, turn it off to maximize when those tides are working to our favor, the water that we can treat. But really what we realized is if it could be permitted, it would be able to operate on a continuous basis, thereby treating more water with a subaqueous intake. And so we have designed a system that allows for subaqueous intake, and right now we're in the process of getting construction pricing for that. So that most likely will be back in front of you here very shortly.
Matt, who operates currently? You said it's done on your cell phone. I know it's not just you, or should we be scared?
They shall remain nameless. No, it's folks in the Public Works Department.
So several of you.
No,
Folks in the Public Works
this is
Department.
folks in the Public Works Department.
I wish you a long and healthy life, Matt.
It probably gets simpler when you get a continuous intake. The other value of a continuous intake is it makes testing a little better. We have been doing some testing right now, but the continuous nature will allow some of the systems that we already built to do some additional treatment, and we might see some better results from that. So we're excited. Really, we're at the construction point of that. Don't feel that it's a large number to make that happen. And we do have dollars budgeted. Hopefully they're enough. We'll see. So those are really the primary suite of stormwater projects. And I didn't touch on this in the beginning, but we have a broad spectrum of stormwater related issues. And they range from very large scale problems that you see we're trying to solve with the golf course, to a lesser extent, but still with Pennsylvania, that drainage infrastructure is old. They're large in magnitude. We also have small scale things that, Mango Street, it depends on the rainy season we receive. For some years, that chronic issue really doesn't manifest. We know from the calls that we don't receive. In other years, it does. And it really depends on the weather. And it is not something you can say, well, it's tropical storms. It's not. Sometimes it rains more to the west than it does to the east. And so we have some of those issues, and they're not simply solvable by acts of maintenance. You just can't get the result that you're expected to achieve. And so they need some additional thought and understanding. But they're wholesale much smaller than something like the golf course. That's water, flooding, street flooding, home flooding issues. Then we have a water quality mandate. It is for the freshwater part of the Imperial River. In any roadway project or large-scale project, we try to bake in some water quality because you can do that. But we're also looking for projects that address water quality. I mentioned one of them, Pine Lake Preserve. That was started really not as a flood control project. We realized it could help with that. It was a hydrological restoration and water quality project because the water was moving to the Imperial River quickly through roadside ditches, and we restored it to its overland flow, which slows it down, allows plants to take up the nutrients. It allows ultraviolet light to break it down when it's moving across the surface of the land. And so we're always looking and need to look for water quality improvement. You'll hear the bioreactor come up a whole lot. It is not our one-trick pony, but The reason you hear it come up a lot is because we believe that that technology has the ability to be highly effective, measurable, and put in a small footprint. And in a city that's built out, as Bonita Springs is, small footprints are important for us. So we kind of have those three needs. I think we've chipped away at some of the larger ones and are going to continue to do so. But really identifying those next steps. 24 years ago, Bonita's, one of the things I've heard is it chased stormwater problems and flooding problems and felt that it really had them handled. Along came Irma, and we were asked to tackle monumental problems, okay? So I don't know where the next set of stormwater issues are. I have some ideas, but really what would help us identify that is probably looking in the next CIP at a stormwater management plan update that could help point us in those directions, either and or citywide and neighborhood specific.
Which is one of the reasons we want to go after that resiliency.
Well, that's storm surge.
Well, yeah.
I think,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you. That's a different animal in terms of resiliency.
I'm glad you're saying that, because from my end is when I looked at the 19 and 20 phase 1 and phase 2 of the stormwater studies that you had done in the city here, you had a whole punch list of projects that were rated in terms of priority. And I guess my real question is, can that be used as a baseline for this list of what the relevant projects remain and how we spend that?
I think some of the work that was done after Hurricane Irma was of value to the city. I think that's the stuff you're referencing.
Exactly.
Some of it was of lesser value. There had been a stormwater master plan. There were two that were done, I believe, in 2010. In 2010, it tackled volumetric issues, and in 2012, it tackled nitrogen. Right, because it was on the context that a nitrogen regulation was coming. Sorry for the snap. So the deal is that one honestly was a little early in those stages, and so some of the things that identified were not really relevant. It said turn the dog park. It wasn't a dog park at the time, into a giant stormwater pond. So I think as you learn more about your community, I think the short answer is I think you should start with a new baseline. I think we have exhausted some of the ideas that were identified both in the earlier work. Shangri-La Road was one of them in the stuff from 2010, as well as in the later work that came out of Hurricane Irma. Hurricane Irma, the big idea that was sitting in Hurricane Irma was the golf course project.
Clearly my concern is
And home buyout.
each one of these are a chunk of change. And we're going into a plateauing of revenue for a little bit here. And that how we effectively use our money for the number one priorities, I think, are key to get that punch list drawn up, and some level of investment to put that punch list together, I think, is needed. So I just throw that out there for your consideration.
Matt, just, it's something in conversations that you and I have had, and Arlene, the death by 1,000 paper cuts. We have a lot of turnover of older homes in our community, and we have a number that have culverts or used to have culverts. And I'm wondering if we can do something inexpensive as a city of letting new homeowners know that, I know they don't like that dip by the roadway, but filling that in, they can't do it. How do we stop that? We've got 250 homes in some of these communities where 20-30% of them have filled them in because they don't like the aesthetics, or they trip and fall, or they think it's unhealthy, but they're there for a reason.
I don't have a great answer for that. I'll tell you, where the water moves through those neighborhoods, we go in from time to time, regrade the swale. If the water's really flowing, it fills up. We come back 5 years later, we regrade the swale. If we were a conventionally organized government, which I'm not advocating for, and we had an army of people, maybe that's fine. You can make a career out of digging the same hole in the ground. sodding it and digging it again. The residents aren't necessarily filling in their yards. Floor tam grass grows on itself, or at least from my childhood experience. We get into a difficult position where most folks don't want a swale in their yard, and because if the swale's doing what it should hold some water for a few days, so it can percolate. If you have clay soil underneath it, it'll hold it for a whole lot of days. If you have a really high water table, which we get in the summertime, it'll hold it for a real long time. And then you'll get people calling about mosquitoes and the health concerns associated with the standing water. And they're not wrong. So I don't think there's a very simple answer. I think you have a changing, we live in a community that has a changing population with changing expectations. And truthfully, probably many would prefer to see us work not to maintain systems like that were born out of an earlier time and age. They probably want to see us modernize their communities, and that's expensive.
That's my point is, can you do something to?
The other thing is, we do work with code enforcement. We permit driveways. If someone comes in to retrofit their driveway, we reestablish those things where we can. But we're cautious. We can't be calling in code enforcement on every one of our neighbors and residents here for things they didn't do.
Like an educational program and proactive when new homeowners come in.
Sure, we can do that.
What might assist with that is if we do move into the stormwater master plan going into the neighborhood specific, there'll be more educational opportunities.
That
There'll be
helps.
more of understanding of that neighborhood specific situation. And there'd be public workshops involved with any project that we were to take on or decide not to take on. So there would be an opportunity to educate and provide that update then. And I think when folks are more educated, understanding how the system works, then they're more willing to participate in the maintenance.
It does help, but we've inherited imperfect systems. And the driveway thing is a big deal, because if you have an inverted driveway, it is part of the drainage system. And over 40 years, 50 years, it's obvious either people weren't there wasn't as much direct oversight. You didn't have a city. It was a different time and place. And so all it takes is one of your neighbors to 30 years ago have built a driveway the incorrect way, and it will hold water on you. And so it's a complicated issue.
Yeah, to be fair, development standards have changed, obviously. And so now, as we're going to see the pressures of infill development, which we're excited to see, many in your community and many in the mayor's community, any riverine property is becoming tear downs and rebuilds. And so they're falling under the new design standards, but we have those older homes that are already there until redevelopment occurs and the requirements of that upgrade happen. There's some opportunity to look at these neighborhoods individually. Another big key, we have to make sure we're informing folks of the private systems, the private roads versus the public system. It's a huge educational process.
And we do have some educational things. I think, though, the way Arlene, the context, when you're looking at it through the lens of something like this, it's more helpful. We see it with construction projects, too, because when you push it out, just out into the ether, it doesn't really land.
Laura?
Yeah, Matt, for the communities that have already raised their driveways, like my mom lived Vanderbilt Lakes, they all started to just raise their driveways. And I kept saying to her, no, it's built in. That's why it's Vanderbilt Lakes in some ways. The lakes are also in the front of your house periodically. But everybody started doing it, and the water then moves to the person who's the lowest. And do you have a solution for those who have already done it?
Well, in your situation, you're talking about a private neighborhood that chose to develop in such a way that it needed inverted driveways. So the answer is no.
Okay. But no, you don't have any.
That is the problem.
That you would do.
What you described is the problem that Councilman Fullick's talking about in non-gated communities. And elevation plays a key. Most people want it piped. it's very expensive, and we can't just go in and do that. You have to study it, understand it, design it, and it's a very expensive undertaking. Even to regrade, because neighbor A held back neighbor B's water. It may not be neighbor A holding back neighbor B's water. It may be neighbor 100 times A, way down there, holding it back. So when neighbor C minus calls and says, I shouldn't say C minus, but when neighbor A plus calls and says, come fix this, they're asking for several hundred thousands of dollars of fix to fix every person's driveway so that the water flows down a downward gradient and re-sod it. And the minute you do that, one of those neighbors along that continuum says, I don't want this.
Exactly.
And that has happened. So then you say, well, is that the right solution? Because it does require a pretty ongoing maintenance program to it if it's really carrying water. Or do you look at a more expensive but more permanent fix that leads to a happier outcome? You may not be able to do as many in any given time, but it's a balancing act.
Anything else on stormwater?
We got all day. We could.
No, we don't.
I hope hopefully I've explained these things.
Well, I think we would like some direction that we bring back at a future meeting, is if you are comfortable with proceeding with updates to the stormwater master plan. I think one of the things that we feel would be key to this is many of you receive individual requests. That's how the Mango Street came forward. That's how Big Bend came forward. Other streets have come forward because of resident concerns. If we can look at a holistic look at it and then give you the opportunity to prioritize those, both small and larger projects, it's just a more scientific way of reviewing it instead of of course, we're always here to hear those concerns and add those to the plan, but having a more holistic view of everything and where it falls in the prioritization would be helpful.
Motion.
Well, we don't.
No motions, so yes, thank you.
I think you're on the right path.
Okay.
Okay.
Let me bring up the next one. Oh, there's the guys in the pipe. I knew you could see them in one of these. Okay.
If we're going to go to transportation at this point, I would ask that we start with the Sun Trail, the Rails to Trails part of this, because we've got people here that are willing to provide some information for what we heard up in Tallahassee last week, their experiences with other programs, because I think we need to have a discussion about how we proceed from here. Given what we heard in Tallahassee, given the reluctance of the county to get involved, and what makes sense going forward. And so Charles Hines is here to answer any questions we have from the Trust for Public Lands. Deb Orton's here, and Kyle Moran and Jim Magnus are here to talk about it from a business community down in downtown. Just to start the conversation, the city spent $30 million getting downtown ready for development. And since that time, we spent untold hours and meetings on everything from the Baron Collier project to the Wonder Gardens, to Riverside Park improvements, to entice businesses to come downtown. And we've got this, what I consider to be sort of an ugly scar that runs through Bonita Springs with the railroad right-of-way. Because if you stand on the railroad right-of-way and look north or south, you see a bunch of scrub oaks and weeds and everything else growing through it. And I think it's it's probably one of the more, from a transportation standpoint, other than the quadrant plan, probably to me, the most important transportation kind of project that the city has. So, I think while we've been rejected at this point by the county, and while questions remain on the part of some of the legislature about the overall cost of the 14 miles, I think there is good news in terms of who's supporting this project and the people that are willing to stand behind it. I talked to people, for example, at the Wonder Gardens fundraiser, and they said, "Well, how's the Rails to Trails program?" And I said, "Well, I'll give you the facts, what we're hearing." And they shake their head in disbelief because they really want this project to succeed. And so it's how do we keep it going at this point? And to me, if the county wants out, then we sort of need to say, okay, let's trim it back to the three parties that really want it: Collier County, Bonita Springs, and Estero. And how do we move forward from here? Well, what we tried to do is to switch gears from going to the county and arguing with those people, because that's not been successful, to having a strategy that says, let's find multiple grant opportunities to find money here, money there, and so forth. The wildlife corridor opportunity is an example. But we sort of run into a problem in that, if you're a grantor and you've got grant funds available, you'd like to see a path forward to this thing succeed. And, so I'm just going to throw out an idea more than anything. Maybe, Charles can talk to it or whatever if we ask him any questions. But one of the things that occurs to me is that there is a Florida governmental funding program that offers low-cost financing options to local governments for various capital projects. Well, if you remember, Estero has gone through this rating system where they got rated for issuing bonds. Now, I think there's maybe a simpler way forward than going that route at this point. And a simple way forward is to use the Florida program. What's involved in it is having J.P. Morgan simply assess the credit worthiness of the city, much like what would have happened up in Estero. And once that's completed, then thinking about getting a letter of credit from J.P. Morgan, not borrowing the money until it's actually needed and incurring the issuance costs. That would require actually complying with the charter on how we borrow monies. But having a letter of credit in place for a certain amount more money may give the grantors the idea that there is a way forward, and if they provide the grant dollars, it's actually going to be successful. This is just sort of an idea that seems to me to make some sense going forward. It buys us the time to renegotiate the price, make people satisfied with the price for a shorter trail. It gives us opportunities to approach more grantors with respect to grant requests. And, maybe it's something we need to think about. I'm not suggesting we make a decision on it or anything, but at least have it in mind when we get around to the next strategic planning meeting. But I think, there probably is a way to go forward. I know that there is a lot of support still with Sun Trails altogether, with Wildlife Corridor people. The Wildlife Corridor people are going to be talking to Senator Pasadomo. And you know, so it's just a way to keep this thing on track and keep it moving along to at least see if there's a way forward that we can get to. So, you know, if anybody's got any questions of, I mean, Charles has been through this up in Sarasota County. They went through a referendum project for a sales tax. I don't know that that's the way to go. That, you know, we could borrow the money, we could bond ourselves and so forth. But what I'm more interested in at this point myself is how do we keep moving over the next several months to see if we can find the solution we need to get this thing done. And it seems to me that if we can tell the grantors, look, we've arranged a letter of credit, we've been through the credit worthiness process of being able to issue bonds, given the voters wanting to back us up and vote for it, then, and that's represented by a letter of credit that we don't have to get approval for, then I think that's a way forward. But that's just an idea.
I'm okay with teeing it up and having a letter of credit, but what I just want to understand that, you know, so obviously it gives them the ability to then say, hey, we can get money, so this might actually come to fruition. I don't want this to be used as a teeing up of a tax, because there's been, I mean, even in Tallahassee, two of the four of them were like, you guys are probably gonna have to come up with a tax if you want it to work. And my answer was, yeah, that's not gonna happen.
Because a tax, I think, you know, once you do it, it never goes away.
No, 100%. Even the sunset ones never sunset. It is a.
Yeah, I would, you know, if I had to, I'd rather borrow the money, and because you know it can be paid, you know, at some point it can be paid back. You know, at some point, maybe 10, 12 years ago, we had a lot more debt on our books than we have now. And, you know, I don't know if Lisa's still here, but, you know, she is. But, you know, perhaps the next meeting, she can sort of go through the history of the debt that the city's carried, what our debt capacity looks like to be, and so forth. But, so it's just a way to keep things moving along.
Well, one of the concerns I've got, and we saw it up at all these functions that we go to, the public, absolutely, 90% of them believe that this thing's done. And that's the biggest problem we've got, is everybody thinks we've already got the money and that the 82 million, it's been purchased. You start talking to people and saying, no, it hasn't. They're surprised, number one. And I'm not sure it's something that we can do with the media, but I think in our zeal to make this happen, we've sort of laid the groundwork that we're moving forward. And we want to move forward, but City of Bonita Springs doesn't have $82 million. I would think that a campaign as a council, as a city, saying that we're still looking for the money, we're willing to work with other parties, but I don't think we've done enough to bring the private sector in. And I think that's something that we need to be more aggressive in approaching the private sector, saying we need your help to make this happen. I would be willing to bet that if we got private sector money with what we've got and suddenly had $30 or $40 million in private sector money, we might even get the commission to start thinking twice, because they'd look like an impediment rather than, well, what they are right now. Kind of a disinterested party, and it's not a priority.
I think the question that I would ask in this whole thing is since joining council, we've talked about probably at least 3 to 5 different solutions in terms of scope. And what I'm really curious about as we move forward, what are we going to define our scope we're going to go for? What is that goal? Is it just a Bonita solution? Is it a Collier County, Bonita, Estero, Lee County solution? Because if we're going to go sell this thing or look at financing options or debt obligation or stuff like that, I guess I haven't heard a landing on exactly what are we looking to buy. And then after we bought the development of it, and then ultimately the ongoing maintenance costs associated with it. So I mean, if we're just looking at the 5.6 miles, whatever the miles are here in Bonita Springs, I guess that's fine. I guess that's would be my question, Chris.
Well, I think, basically at this point, I don't know that we have a choice other than to have the mileage that goes through Collier County, Estero, and Bonita Springs.
Is that 11 point something?
11 point something, okay. We know that construction money is available through the state for the development of the trail. We know that, the ongoing maintenance would probably be, in that situation, would probably be up in the, up to each one of the cities. But it does occur to me that one of the things we need to do is to actually have a South Lee County, call it South Lee County, Collier, like an MPO organization of all three, the two cities in Collier, that are able to sit down and work out a plan going forward. Right now, we're sort of, Estero's working on stuff, Collier's working on stuff, we're working on stuff. I think we approached this thing initially thinking that it was going to be a grand linear park that would come under the county, at least so far as the part in Lee County, that would come under the county as part of their park system, because they could then regulate it and maintain it as part of the parks. So we got to come up with a different plan, and I think a three-party MPO-like organization that can get together and resolve some of these issues is what we need to do. And, I know that, Estero's got ideas, we got ideas, Collier County obviously has a need to be able to, the only thing they're interested in is basically finishing Veterans Parkway so that they can get it over to 041. So, but I think that's the way we need to go, and we can figure out the maintenance costs and so forth.
Charles is here. I'm not asking you to make a commitment, Charles, but is that feasible for us to carve out that 11 point some miles and say these three entities want to move forward?
Yes, the way we wrote the contract initially was to be able to bifurcate it that way. So what we're calling right now is, phase one, phase two. Phase one would be that 11.4 miles with Estero, Bonita Springs, and Collier. And then you'd have a gap, but hopefully once we get going and it becomes successful, then Lee would come along and then add it up to the John Yarborough Trail. And, Councilman, we started this kind of task force MOU that is really needed so that your staff can work with, when you say this is your project, who is you? Well, it's three jurisdictions right now, and then the state and the feds. And you're exactly right. The state and the feds always look at, well, what's the local government doing? So this isn't really a top-down funding project. It needs to be a bottom-up. And so when you go talk with the state like you've done, well, what do you all have in it? Where are you on this? Where's your community? And that's what's needed, I think, a little task force that can talk about ownership, maintenance, timing, funding, would be very, very helpful for TPL to help you all, because this is your project. We're helping with filing for federal grants, state grants, coming up with creative thinking, like Commissioner Cordes is talking about. There's other ways to do it, including it in the wildlife corridor as a possibility. So that's the creative thinking, but we need you all really driving it, and having that task force would be great.
How do we move forward?
But Arlene, how do we move forward in terms of putting together a task force group from Estero, Bonita Springs, and Collier, sort of like an MPO? Is this just a multi-jurisdictional
I would suggest
agreement or
you have ask for a liaison of elected from each of the boards and their staff, because there needs to be a governmental liaison to provide. There's been conversations with staff and I think that there needs to be there needs to be elected official as well, representing in those meetings,
If Collier would be what, a commissioner?
correct?
Collier, I'm good with humoring this. Collier County is not gonna care, and Lee County doesn't wanna get involved. But we can do this. I'm happy to go through the motions of trying to do that, and I'm not trying to poo-poo on it, I'm just being realistic. They're not, the county doesn't give a crap about the last 3 miles of that for Collier, and Lee County purposely doesn't wanna get involved.
That's not my understanding, Jesse. They save a lot of money if we can make this happen. That's the reason they would get involved in this.
They initially said they were
I
not.
want to be clear, what you're asking for is a task force of Collier County, Bonita, and Estero. You were not asking,
Okay, so Lee County's not.
you were not asking for Lee
No,
County.
we just assume that they're out. If they want to get in later on, that's fine.
Yes. And we just started, I don't know who took on the task of, the task force of drafting kind of a beginning of an MOU. Do you know who was doing that? Collier County?
No,
What-
I
no,
believe TPL took the first stab at that. Doug
Is, okay,
had
well,
a
let me,
stab at it to circulate, yeah.
you know, again, this isn't some magnificent document, but it's just something getting us
I
together.
think we need to clarify, there's 2 steps there. Going to an MOU is an agreement approved by each of the elected authorities. If you're talking about a task force that can come up and work on that agreement, because to ask staff to make commitments of elected officials is not conducive.
So I heard what Councilman Corey, what I heard was he was looking for the possibility of putting together some kind of group that could go after financing. So that could be, you could create an MPO-like structure through an interlocal agreement. Probably that may be, while that may be the recommendation of a task force, the other option would be to send letters to all the potential participants and see if they'd be willing to enter into an interlocal agreement to explore funding options. And then if they reject that,
My
do it that
concern
way.
is creating a document when we haven't had an agreement amongst all the jurisdictions of what
That would be phase 2,
responsibilities.
wouldn't it? First phase would be a working group.
Correct.
Yeah, maybe that's a better term, working group, that we have consistent meetings, we have updates. Someone from your council has the constant information, where are the needs, where can we have some funding ideas. I'm not trying to overcomplicate it, maybe we're using semantics and as to what's the right term of this. But we need to get the 3 jurisdictions meeting consistently, hammer out the idea of ownership, funding, timing, and we started that with just kind of a brief meeting, but I think it's time to move forward. We've been focused on filing federal grants and looking for state money. When I say we, I mean TPL. But, so.
Question.
Yeah, so I remember, Charles, you guys said that you could come up with the money if you got enough support, so the government's not getting behind you?
We would help you come up with the money. So I mean, I'm saying, and this is where I think we got to switch this, and that, Lee County's position was, hey, we like the project. Hey, TPL, if you can bring us $82 million, great. Well, we can help you all find that money because you will own it. It's your project. So what's happening is, we can help you, but we need the cities and Collier County to kind of be on the same page and go forward, because every time we get a piece of paper to fill out from a federal grant, what's the local commitment? And right now, the commitments with you all, just for example, $5 million. However, it's asterisk, as last that I understand it, it's still for a SunTrail eligible project. So I don't think you all, if you did, I apologize, it's on us, that if you thought from Bonita Springs, you could get this project for a $5 million commitment. That's, I don't know
No,
that's
no, no,
realistic.
because we
Okay,
didn't even start it.
Right.
It came to
So-
us, and it was, how it was presented was that this organization, yours, would be able to help facilitate getting funds.
And that's what we're doing.
Right.
And so like a couple things were mentioned earlier, like Sarasota County, how we did
Right.
it. It was one jurisdiction, even though it went through the city of Venice and into the city of Sarasota. And we did a ballot measure, asked the question, our citizens passed it at 72%, and we just borrowed the money. So Sarasota County only, a lot simpler. Pinellas County did a penny for Pinellas infrastructure surtaxes, I believe, and it went toward the Pinellas Trail and other things. So there's different ways of doing it. This is just a little more complicated because of, it was 4 jurisdictions. Now for phase 1, it'll be 3. We just need to get all on the same page so that we can work with the state and the feds, and that'll, the federal government for grants. It would just be a lot easier.
Well, I know that we were asked to move this as a priority at MPO and FDOT, which we did, and it got on the priority list. But I did ask behind the scenes, what's the likelihood of achieving this?
So when at the time, Lee County was still there, and they just said, we're not really interested in that. So that damaged that process. But now if the 3 of you say we are, then the next question is, well, where are you financially in this?
This was a month ago, but
Yeah.
okay.
So Sun Trail application grant is still out there.
Yeah.
And so, and there's money there for it, but the question is always well, what's Bonita got in it? What's Estero got in it? What's Collier got in it?
Well, doesn't anyone ask, why does the railroad think it's worth $82 million when it's just a bunch of weeds and a hassle and?
Appraisals for it.
Yeah,
What?
They did appraisals.
yeah, there's,
Appraisals.
I know that, but it's just the railroad, and it's a special treatment that they get. It's not just appraisals. It's the treatment and what they get in return for keeping the railroad. But what is the likelihood that they would negotiate with that
I think to be
number?
fair to council, the statement that they thought that they could be in it for 5 million is incorrect. They've had
No,
multiple meetings for years regarding the project. The idea was that was a placeholder, that if an opportunity of greater funding opportunity was presented to council, they could then fully participate. It also allows them each time to participate in the grants. It was always the understanding that there was going to be outside resources available to the community to participate. And how we get there, yes, that's the next question.
yeah, and I apologize if you misunderstood the way I was saying it, but what happens now when we go to apply and we say, well, what's the local commitment? It's limited. So we need to open that up a little bit and see what a local commitment is and what's available.
But you've got 3 entities that are truly interested. Right now, it seems like the 3 are working not against each other, but on their own paths. If we had a working group, then you take the 3 interested parties working together to obtain money, funding, et cetera.
It would help if we're all just talking with each other versus
One voice.
through 3 different phone calls and meetings, and I know there's some lessons learned and that we can help each other and work as, we're 3 different jurisdictions, but really one working group with a common goal.
I think another benefit of it,
Just,
Go ahead.
Jesse, go.
Well, no, I was just, okay, I am happy to do the working group. Nothing against the working group. I think we run that, I think we try to let that dog hunt. If we end up in a situation where we're just bumping against time and it's not working, has there not, this is outside the box and nobody's discussed this, so I'm just curious if this has been thought of as a potential, if we try to run this to the road, it doesn't happen. Is there, with the ownership the way that it is, would there potentially be an opportunity for Bonita hypothetically to carve out 4 to 6 miles of it that goes directly through our downtown? And then for us to deal with, instead of the entirety of it, this piece. And then perhaps if we can actually get us behind that 4 to 6, now the other entities may be like, okay, wow, Bonita's really gonna do this part and it's real. And maybe now the next 4 to 6 north of us happens or south of us happens. But at least it would be a piece and it would be a middle. And if we were gonna do any piece, right through the middle of the downtown would be the piece that is going to be the most beneficial to us in regards to ROI for the entire trail. If there's going to be one, that's where it's going to be at. So I don't know if that's anything that we've thought about, but.
Well, to kind of answer that, and what, I know just enough to be dangerous, because it's a rail corridor. Right. And to rail bank it, you can't just isolate and cut off a piece. So we could work south, north, but to come into the middle and cut off the Bonita Springs part, it would leave the Collier part isolated. and that would mess up the whole rail banking things. Now, I can get you more information on
Well,
that.
that'd only be
but that's-
short term. If they sold it that way, then Collier we could have the ability to then liaise with Collier and let them
We
jump
could get
on.
Collier just to close on their piece, and we work south to north, that could be a potential. So, so that's why we kind of wrote in the contract the way we did, was because it was a large number, 4 jurisdictions. We said, well, maybe we could break it up. But my recollection was you couldn't leave an isolated rail segment.
Okay.
And because once it's sold, it's broken, so.
One of the things that we did hear consistently up there was that the issue with the rails trail side of it was the clawback components that were in the agreement, and they felt like those were potentially an an obstacle. I'm sorry, moving forward. So I don't know if you want to speak on that or.
Clawback.
Yeah, apparently there's.
If you went to possibly light rail service down the road,
Oh,
you've
okay.
got the ability to.
So the rail banking process protects this rail corridor, you know, federal law, and it's a good law to protect it, because no way you can ever come back and recreate this corridor. The protection for you and the taxpayers here locally, if they do try to come back and recreate a rail, they have to pay you back. So, and pay for your infrastructure and those types of things. That's why you haven't really seen that happen across the country. Now where they're building the different ones, they're looking at DOT right-of-ways and so forth, because it would be very expensive for a rail operator to come back in and do that. But so you're protected that way. Could it happen? Yes. But they just can't come in and say, well, we're putting the railroad back, you're out. So that's, yes, there's a clawback, but you're protected financially.
Yeah, if you look at it, Jesse, and you take a city like Denver, for example, that had rail, and they converted them to trails, it's actually cheaper to buy the right-of-way along the interstates than it is to go back and recapture a developed bicycle pedestrian pathway that's been
I
converted.
think the last MPO meeting, or 2 or 3 ago, LK, we talked about light rail and said if it comes down this way, it would probably within the interstate different right-of-ways versus trying to come in. So,
Because if for no other reason, then you'd have access to the airport.
Is that the only clawback, Charles?
yeah,
And it would be at future value, same thing, they have to get an appraisal?
correct. And then your investment, right, yeah.
The appraised value at the time.
Well, to kind of close this up, do you want to be the representative for?
Yes.
I mean, we can keep talking and talking, but I mean, we're really not getting much done,
Well, yeah.
other than, it'd be best if we got this working group together, and I think out of all of us, kind of
So
Chris has
do
the
we-
most knowledge on
We
this.
have
so.
agreement, we need to work together to
Well,
find it.
I would suggest that there needs to be appropriate outreach as elected to ask the other folks to participate. So I don't know if that's going to be done by TPL or.
Yeah, we can make that call. I mean, it's just building on that meeting we had, I don't know, 4 or 5 months ago. And a lot of
So
things
they'll
have
be,
happened.
I just want to be clear, you'll be requesting an elected official from Estero and an elected official from Collier County,
And a staff person, yeah.
an appropriate staff.
I would put the county manager on your request that goes to whichever commissioner you're gonna be at, because I mean, TPL along with many other organizations send a lot of emails, so it's easy for an elected to be like, okay, cool, no. Put the city manager on and be like, hey, we're trying to meet with you, and maybe you'll get more
You're
success.
talking about Collier County, right?
Yep.
And just, I'm conscious about Lee County, so we are in communication with them. We give them information, because I truly believe that at some point they'll come in, their citizens will demand to close that gap. So it's not like we're mad at Lee County. They were straight with us from the beginning. It's like, we like the project, we just have some roads we want to get built first. So we'll keep them in the loop, but for now, to move forward with this phase 1, it's you 3 that are Bonita, Estero, and Collier that are the key.
Is there any way that, like, people can contribute?
Yeah, we were talking earlier about some private funding.
Yeah.
So we haven't, how we would do that and where the money would be banked, I'd need to think through that. But private sector funding does help. I mean, every dollar that It's not a state dollar or federal dollars, and then private funding shows the community supports it,
Right.
so.
Well, and if you sort of say, like you said, you get the money back if it doesn't go through, or,
Right.
right? So we say the same thing to folks who want to contribute, because, you know, $100 from each person adds up.
I think we got to be careful with that part of it too, just because, you know, parking a significant amount of money, whether it's government dollars or private dollars, with either you guys or any other organization, and then, you know, if there's some bureaucratic BS reason why something can't happen, now we have all these dollars and somebody's responsible for them.
That's what's going through my mind. Do you do it at a foundation where it's under terms, or is it a pledge agreement? But private funding is important, and so let me do a little more digging on that.
Yeah, I think we made good progress on this, so.
Thanks for having me down.
Thank you, Charles.
Thanks for your patience, waiting on us.
The John R. Wood Railway.
All right, Matt.
All right. So this is transportation. I'll make it brief. It's hard to see in here, but the yellow is our projects that are under design or getting ready to be. It talked about, this is the West Terry Street South Side Sidewalk, and then you have the continuation of East Terry Street Paradise, which you just selected a design firm that will negotiate a contract and bring back to you with. Long range, you know, ideas that have come up in the past, maybe something more pedestrian friendly along Shangri-La Road. I can't see very well. That's pretty much it. So I'll make this brief, but generally, much like the stormwater, we have a couple of different types of transportation projects. One is more multimodal, retrofitting existing corridors for bikeability, walkability, you know, generally just a better embodiment of our comprehensive plans vision for the city. The others are major transportation projects, and I'll touch on those. We have limited opportunities for those, but I'll touch on the ones that we do have. With the retrofit projects or new construction, drainage is a key issue around here, as we learned from the stormwater. So just about everything we do requires enclosed drainage. One of the reasons on a retrofit project for a sidewalk or multi-use path, it keeps us away from trying to buy right away. So it makes a happier end customer because you have the enclosed drainage, which we had the discussion about, but two, it provides the space up above for you to maximize your existing right of way and build the sidewalk or the pedestrian facility. It also provides for the physical separation, which we feel is an important part in our retrofit projects. When you put a curb in, there will be a drainage pipe underneath it. But that curb also helps you. Here's a recent one we did along East or West Terry. Those are all school kids. This was a 5-foot wide sidewalk. We ended up putting, where we could, a curb to protect those folks. Before that, they were just walking 1 foot from the travel lanes with no protective barrier to, wake someone up in case they, didn't know where they were driving. Another feature that we try to incorporate in all of our projects is landscaping and hardscaping. Hardscaping's, fancy code for, sidewalks or decorative pavers up to park benches, where appropriate. And then we feel landscaping is, again, carrying out the city's vision, but also helps with traffic calming and, provided shaded walkways, and really just carrying out the city's comprehensive plan vision. So the first few projects here are the first two are very well along in their life cycle. Goodwin Street is an old corridor. We will require right-of-way along the length of it. We're in the process of coming back to you for those right-of-way acquisitions. It'll take a year to get all of that property, a year plus, to get it assembled. But it's taken a lot of engineering work and permitting work. It involves replacement of a bridge that's functionally obsolete, and then tweaking the design in such a way that we have the least amount of impact on the properties that we will need. Unfortunately, along that corridor, we've had a pedestrian killed and a bicyclist injured in the last 10 years. So that's kind of what bore the need of it. It's at a 90% design, but it is a very complicated project. So it's progressing at what some might feel is a slow pace, but for as complicated as it is, we're actually moving quite right along. Rosemary is moving much quicker because there is no additional right-of-way required. We're in an existing corridor. It's again it's a pedestrian-heavy project, traffic calming, pedestrian-heavy. You just approved the concept here, which includes speed tables, F-curb, enclosed drainage. I believe it's a 10-foot path on one side and a 6-foot on the other, as well as landscaping and lighting. All things that we've heard out of that neighborhood for years. The road is in poor condition, so there's an element of road reconstruction. We're at the 90% design phase. We're in permitting. Construction could start as early as some point in the late fall or early winter of this coming year that we're in.
We have those spike strips for the electric bikes in there?
No, we don't.
Okay, I was just making sure.
Paradise, Paradise Road is a more comprehensive project. We anticipate it will follow a model like Rosemary in that we won't really be looking for right-of-way other than maybe at an intersection. Maybe we look at an intersection treatment that requires that. I don't know yet. But you just approved the design firm. We'll negotiate a contract and bring that back to you. Really, once they get under contract and they get a few months to kind of ascertain baseline data, we'll be at a point where we'll need public input. I feel this project, I mentioned it in a meeting not too long ago, it will require a lot of public input because it can be very complicated, it can be somewhat complicated, or anything in between. And we're going to rely on the public to kind of give us that feedback on the design there. But it is traffic calming, pedestrian infrastructure, landscaping, lighting, for the length of Paradise Road, from Shangri-La Road north to its terminus. Network expansion. So I mentioned the opportunity, those projects I mentioned are really bike ped oriented or comp plan vision, combination of both. Our major capacity project that we've been pursuing is the northwest quadrant road behind Bonita Beach Road. We are at a 90% design. We're in permitting. We expect those permits probably by next month. The only outlying issue that precludes us from construction is a right-of-way agreement between ourselves and one entity. Derek recently informed me he's actually been in contact with them. We have sent a draft agreement to them. In the event that fails, we would look at condemnation, but we really feel we have a good working relationship and we'll be able to come back to you with a right-of-way agreement at some point this year. Hopefully sooner than later. We will keep engaged. As soon as we have the right-of-way, we can move to construction on this. This project dovetails into an FDOT further out project that I'll show next that really addresses the congestion at the US 41 Beach Road intersection. But this is a key component as it will help bleed off left-hand turns that are clogging the intersection and give them an alternate route. You can think of it as a giant east to north left-hand turn lane. It also, if you were headed from the north to south and going to the beach, you don't have to proceed through the intersection.
Is that going to be signalized there?
Which part? It uses the existing signal at US 41.
On Bonita Beach Road.
And this, it's hard to see, but this is a single lane displaced left that will be signalized. So Windsor Road will receive a signalization treatment. There'll actually be a signal up here as well. What you end up with is a very long left-hand turn lane, some that's on Bonita Beach Road on the south side and some that's on the north side, and then ultimately the left-hand turn itself.
Matt, is there any consideration to having heading south on 41, a no left turn? No U-turn, no U-turn, no U-turn.
So we don't control US 41. We can certainly pass that along to FDOT.
I'll do that.
So speaking of FDOT, last year around this time, actually in I think it was in April. No, it was in March. FDOT did finalize the concept of improvements for the US 41 Bonita Beach Road. The part that you see here in gray is the cities. They will modify what we build and kind of straighten it out and produce a road that comes across to a Royal Road. as well as a displaced left on both the north and south US 41 movements. So they are moving into a design phase. That was a major hurdle back in March. It means that they're no longer considering overpasses. They have settled in on this concept, and now they're working to design it, and they'll be working on the right-of-way acquisitions associated with it. There is another FDOT PD&E study that has not been finalized. They held their first public meeting back in April of 2022. That is for Old 41. It involves a quadrant road kind of across the dog track property from the city's perspective. Down in Collier County, it's a 4-laning project. The FDOT has not gone and proceeded to the second meeting, which ultimately finalizes the concepts, but both concepts had a quadrant road in the city's arena.
Do they have funding?
No, they don't.
Thank you.
So the next project I mentioned earlier is a drainage project, but it does have major transportation improvements. It's hard to see. One of those that we heard loud and clear at the public meeting that we already were addressing is cutting in a second southbound turn lane onto Imperial Parkway along East Terry Street. In addition, we analyzed the intersection at Morton Avenue for signalization. The recommended design here is a roundabout. And then actually at, I don't have an image of it, but at Southern Pines, you may recall the consultant came back after the public meeting and we'll be putting a traffic signal there. So those are the transportation pieces, but the dollars come from stormwater. So that's why I spent the time in the last meeting talking about the stormwater improvements. It is a stormwater project. We were able to do a few transportation improvements. Probably, the biggest is these intersections, but also the fact that we're able to build a pathway. You can't see it here very well, but a 10-foot pathway throughout the length of that project corridor. It is at a 90% design and in permitting. It's mostly funded by grant dollars. We have accounted for some city dollars as well because it is a sizable project. Another one that follows the same pattern, it's just not as far along, is the Pennsylvania Avenue corridor drainage and operational improvements. So we've estimated it at $24 million. We recently received a $21 million grant out of Hurricane Ian through Lee County, through HUD, to conduct those improvements. It is a drainage project, but it most certainly will be able to address things like sidewalks, streetscaping, and traffic calming. So we will be developing a draft engineering scope and getting that reviewed, and ultimately, some point probably by the summer or late summer, you'll have a recommendation on a design consultant. And that will also require quite a bit of public involvement to understand what that road corridor looks like. Bonita Grand Drive. This is an interesting project. It is solely funded by the Bonita Grand Mine development. It was part of the settlement agreement with the city. It does mean there are no road impact fees coming from it. I know John mentioned it's coming online. You won't see any revenue there. The reason is the developer is having to acquire the road right away, and they have through the city's condemnation efforts. It's a city road, and they have to pay for the construction up to their entrance, which is several, I don't know how far up it is on Bonita Grand Drive, but it's from East Terry Street north to the mine entrance. The remainder of the roadway is designed and permitted to get to the city's future park, but the onus of construction of that roadway in the future will be on the city. So we'll bear the construction expense. We did not bear the right-of-way expense or the design expense for that final piece of connection. It is it's very hard to see here, but this is just an overhead of Logan Boulevard. Essentially, it is going to be very similar in construction to Logan Boulevard. It will have similar curb system and median in most locations, as well as a 10-foot pathway that's separated, running the length of it. They are aggressively pursuing construction, and probably we'll see that come under construction here within the spring or early summer at the latest.
And we get access to the Kiker Park, right?
Ultimately, yes. That's a coordinative effort we'll have to do with the county. It'll get us to that boundary. That's where the city's park is. We haven't had a lot of coordination with them yet, but yes, likely they'll be, that, the northern boundary is the Kiker Preserve. So, much like the stormwater project or presentation, this is a little different. We're already here. We did receive planning dollars from the Hurricane Ian disaster dollars that Lee County has through HUD for mobility planning. And that mobility planning is not just for bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. It's also for new roadway connections. It's in the scope. And so that solicitation is actually out on the street right now. So it is being advertised. We've gone through the internal review processes. And we expect respondents back March 10th. So some point after that, we'll be recommending some firm to you for consideration. But I just want to be clear that the scope there is not just, you may say, well, it's mobility, it's bike ped. No, we've asked them to look at future roadway connections. Our opportunities for major expansion are limited, but we think there's some things that a study like this could benefit us and show us, not only for bike ped, but for new roadway. So we're excited about it. It's a $500,000 grant, and that's what we plan on expending. Do you have any questions?
It is related to mobility, and it's not, we don't have a CIP for it. I'm just trying to understand functionally. As far as stoplights go, FDOT has control over the stoplights.
Well, it depends. It depends on what stoplight you're talking about. It could be the city, the county, or FDOT. Who operates all of them?
FDOT?
No, is Lee County.
That's Lee County? Okay.
We do it through an interlocal agreement. They even operate the operation of the state.
I don't know what or if there is a modification process-wise timing, as far as timing goes, but Imperial and East Terry is what my wife lovingly refers to as the longest light in America. No matter which direction you're coming from, you're talking 3-4 lights sometimes to get through there. I don't know if timing, adjusting the timing on that would be, beneficial. But I mean, it's very reminiscent of what used to happen at Old 41 before we got the roundabout. So
we can ask them to look. They will look. I know they take their profession very seriously, and they will look. Sometimes they do find timing, probably about 25% on when they can actually do something, or when they come back and say, look, here's the valid answer. What may help with what you're talking about, I'm not certain, is that extra turn lane that the East Terry Street project will cut in, because it'll at least prevent the westbound traffic, particularly now, from stacking up as much as it does.
Yeah. So can we ask them that?
Yes.
Yeah, I would further ask that study include Bonita Beach Road.
Yeah.
It just seems though going east to west, particularly during rush hour, it just seems a sequence issue.
But where on Beach Road do you mean, Jim?
Typically starting just west of 75, you'll get out of sync largely around Imperial and cascading back.
Yeah.
So you make it through the lights through your 1 or 2 cycles as your wife encounters it. It's I don't know that it's a solution to address the long-term solution, but is it efficiently working in terms of timing? And it intersects to where you talk about both 041 and on Imperial.
Yeah, it's the same thing. And so now that we've approved all the stuff and we have all these trucks that are all going out there all the time, they're so large and they're so slow to get this.
Exactly.
Cal Moran will say to get through the intersection and whatnot. Maybe there's a short-term adjustment that could be made that could make it a better flow through until that large amount of construction and truck movement ceases.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job, Matt.
Good job, Matt.
Very good.
You're welcome.
All right, any discussion?
Productive.
Public comment.
All right, public comment.
Wow.
everybody's exhausted.
Wait, nothing
We-
from Dwight?
we
Come
wore
on,
'em-
Carl.
We wore 'em out.
All right, seeing none. Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Yay.